And our author was Olaudah Equiano, and he wrote the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa the African. And he was kidnapped from what is present-day Nigeria at the age of 11, and from there he was transported. Oh, sorry, we had a little issue. I told you I was going to do that. That's why I didn't put that. Where's my... Okay, sorry guys. It deleted another slide. Yeah. Sorry, it deleted one of our slides, so I'm just going to have to go off of this. But anyway, he was kidnapped at the age of 11 and transported from Africa on a slave ship to Virginia. And his first master was, he was kind of a bad guy. He beat Olaudah and didn't treat him well, but it helped him in the fact that it kind of gave him the way of life, like how life was going to be now. And so it taught him that. And then Lieutenant Michael Pascal of the British Royal Navy bought him and renamed him, and that's where he got the name the Gustavus Vasa. And he helped, Olaudah helped him during the war, and got to travel like worldwide because he was on a ship. And as a favorite of Pascal, Pascal sent him to his sister, Mrs. Gurins, and she educated him and converted him to Christianity. So that was pretty neat. And right here, I don't know if y'all can really see it, these are feet. And that's how that's how they slept, and that's how they were transported in the ships. And it was like, I think they had like 3 feet and 3 inches of room per person. Like, it was awful. But from Pascal, Robert King bought Equiano for 40 pounds of silver, and he that's what he plotted to do. And he trained him as a merchant and a clerk for his shipping company. And he was like a really nice guy, and Equiano was also a favorite of him. And he allowed Equiano to buy his freedom for the same amount he paid for him, which was the 40 pounds, and it's like approximately $3,700 today. So it's worth, I mean, he was worth a lot of money. But after he bought his freedom, King offered him a job to stay on as a merchant under Thomas Farmer, who was one of the captains of one of his ships. But they went to Georgia, and because they were so slave happy, I guess you could say, he was beaten and re-enslaved. And so he decided to make his home in Britain. And that's when he published his autobiography, and it was like 1789. In 1789. And he became a key player in the British abolitionist movement. And I think it's really neat because he started out as a slave, but he ended up marrying an English woman of society. And like that's kind of unheard of, so I thought that was pretty neat. And then he ended up dying 8 years after the publication of his book. And then the historian part of it was the American and French revolutions had just ended, and because of the instability that it caused, I mean, people had lost loved ones, and they were all like in debt to each other, and it just caused a lot of instability. And when there was instability in that time frame, they turned to God, they turned to religion, and so it was setting the stage for the Second Great Awakening. And abolitionist parts started popping up because they kind of started realizing like slavery is bad. These are people too, and we really need to work on that. For the average person, their life was based around work and religion. You had nobility who were like the slave owners and everything like that, so they just kind of sat around and beat their slaves for fun. I mean, they were just not nice people. But for recreational purpose, they would go to balls, dances, plays. They would read books. Religion was still playing a big part in this time. Sorry, I'm messing up. And these are kind of pictures of the fashion. The women were wearing high-waisted dresses. Nobility, it was made out of silk, taffeta, really expensive fabrics, and they had a lot. And then when you had the middle class and lower class, their stuff was homemade or hand-me-downs, and it was made out of like cotton and cheaper fabrics. And then the slaves, they just really didn't get anything. Like the owners, I guess, would give them something to cover necessities, and that was that. Let's see. And I think that his work was so well accepted because of the instability and everybody kind of turning to religion and everything like that. They're realizing that slavery was inhumane, and I think that had it been prior to the revolution, it probably would have been, I don't know, it probably would have been less accepted because people treated slaves like they were livestock. I mean, they treated them like animals. They didn't see anything wrong with beating them and taking their kids away and everything like that. And
also, I just want to insert this for you. Before that time, when he wrote his autobiography, if he would have written it before then, it wouldn't have been as well accepted either because people weren't beginning to think of things like maybe this is wrong, these people are people, not property, and so on and so forth. And had he written it afterward, it would have been a little more gentle. But because his was kind of just the right timing, he opened the door for the more dramatic and detailed autobiography of like Frederick Douglass and whatnot.
that's okay. And so now it goes to Laura.
I have the sociology. The text is written by the African slave about the time of enslavement under the white man, and really other than the slave to master and the master to slave, there's really no typically no interaction between the others. Equiano was a favored slave under Pascal and King, and there was more interaction between them than like normal masters and slaves. There were very few women present in the text, with the exception of Pascal's sister, who taught Equiano how to read, and she taught him about Christianity. And the class status, there was master, favored, slave, and slave.
I did the explicator part section of the presentation. It talked about the text arrangement, and the text was arranged in chronological order from when he was free, living in Africa. So he was captured, kidnapped, and sold into slavery, and then when he eventually bought his freedom. And then at the end of the book, he is a free man and married, and discusses his life there. We also discovered that he used several different literary devices in figurative language. The book itself can be considered an allegory, that is essentially a metaphor for freedom. And there were similes used as well when he compares the slave masters to human butchers, and he also gives animalistic type features or descriptions to the slaves. Then he also uses reversal of perspective when he's writing, because he talks about traditionally, Europeans would look upon the slaves as they're slightly scared of them, and their practices are magical and mystical. But when he first meets the Europeans and he's first kidnapped, he describes them with those aspects, with those attributes. That's what he uses to describe them, and so it's kind of reversing what they normally think of the slaves onto what the slaves are actually thinking the same thing about them. There are two different types of characters. Essentially, there's slaves and masters. For the plot, the setting, and the point of view, it's a first-person point of slave narrative. It is autobiography. It's the story of his life. It's basically telling from how he went from being free to a slave to being free again. It has a transitional type setting, wherein as the setting will change with each new master, and because he did a lot of traveling, the setting was based upon where they went and where they were at the time. His style is very similar to like propaganda type material for the abolitionist cause, and he writes in a way that's similar to like the action adventure novels that were popular at the time, like Robinson Crusoe, the way the material is presented. And I think he did that mostly to make it more acceptable, so that people wouldn't just be like, he's throwing this in our face, that jerk, make it a little, ease them into the information, and then at the end he kind of got a little more expressive with, okay, now I told you all this, slavery is bad, it is, and I'm not just going to say it nicely. So, and then we did some central themes that would be found in the work would be slavery and the abolition of the slave trade. He does a lot of speaking about, and he kind of sort of notes upon the fact that it would be important for them to educate themselves. Let's see, as far as relating it to other texts, he had some friends during the time that also published slave narratives. Atoba Kawakino, I don't know how to say his name. I apologize for raping that. But he wrote, sorry, that was inappropriate. I'm sorry. He published his, I'm extremely nervous. In 1787, actually before Equiano, he published his slave narrative. People always think that Equiano was the first, but he actually was not the first. He was just the first to have it published in English, in American, and to be widely published. But his is actually a friend of his published his 2 years before him, and they're actually very similar in stories if you look at them. So in all honesty, from my opinion, it kind of looks like they wrote them together. Hey, let's do this, and we can show them. They listen to us because of our position that we created for ourselves in the community. And we also obviously related it to Frederick Douglass, because had he not written his autobiography, Equiano, then Frederick Douglass may have been seen more as an angry slave lashing out against his ex-masters, and they may have thought he was exaggerating it more, whereas he kind of had a background for, well, he says this too, but this is just more information on it. And I kind of think he did that because of the audience, the timing of the audience. Like, they weren't really ready to hear all that at the time, so he did not give them all that at the time. Okay. His work is actually still used a lot in more recent times as well. There's been children's books. There's one called Equiano, the Slave with a Loud Voice, and there's a book that Equiano wrote that was called The Kidnapped Prince. It's also been turned into like a children's type book. It's only $5.99. No, sorry. There's a theatrical performance that was written about his work called African Snow, and a museum exhibit at the Museum of African Diaspora. Maya Angelou is actually the one who narrates it, and that's actually available on YouTube if you guys want to look at it. It's a chronicle of his autobiography. And there was also a movie in 2006, like a regular Hollywood movie called Amazing Grace, and he's actually in that movie a pretty good bit. His story, because it's got William Wilberforce, who was the he part of the British Parliament, the House of Commons. He was a big abolitionist, worked real hard for the cause. And they actually met each other a couple times and actually socialized with each other, because after he bought his freedom, he lived in London. So we actually have, we put a clip from the movie. And if you were interested at all on the website, I put it on. We have it minimized down there. But because you're a teacher, you can get a free copy of it if you want. The movie, just like just little thing. You can get a free movie. That's courtesy of our presentation. Here's the thing. Let me see. I can pull it up for you. Right.
We might have to wait. Are you about to show us something?
You want me not to do it?
Well, it's just 9:43.
Oh, okay. So we wanted to go.
I'll check it out though.
Okay.
One question for you. What did y'all think about at the end of the autobiography? How do you think the manumission was symbolic?
The main mission was symbolic?
The manumission.
Oh. I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said. I thought you said main mission. How is it symbolic? I don't know. I didn't really think of it as symbolic.
What was the manumission?
Well, I think maybe he wrote it to abolish slavery. So now you can think
No,
about
his
it.
manumission.
Oh.
MANUMISS.
I'm gonna shut up. Let somebody else talk. Go ahead, Ashley. Take that away. Can you repeat the question?
Did you read the whole thing? Did, at the end, the manumission?
Was that like the 5 rhetorical questions that he had at the end, or?
No, it was his document.